You don't expect a love story like this to end quietly. Not one that's been this visible, this celebrated, and this deeply tied to a moment in culture. For nearly a decade, Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe weren't just a couple. They were something symbolic, representing excellence, identity, and a shared journey. So when news broke that they decided to separate, it didn't feel like just another breakup. It felt like the closing of a chapter people had grown alongside. According to ESPN and The Athletic, the separation wasn't sudden or fueled by controversy. In their joint statement, they described it as a mutual decision, something that unfolded over time rather than overnight. That kind of ending carries a different kind of weight, because it doesn't come with a single moment you can point to. It suggests a gradual shift that likely began long before the public noticed. To understand why this resonates, you have to look at what their relationship represented. Sue Bird was one of the defining figures in WNBA history. Her career spanned decades, filled with championships and Olympic gold medals. Her greatness came through precision, leadership, and consistency. Megan Rapinoe brought a different kind of presence. Bold, outspoken, and impossible to ignore on and off the field. A World Cup champion and global voice far beyond sports. When they came together in 2016, it felt like two worlds merging. Two personalities that balanced each other naturally. At the same time, their connection isn't limited to their personal relationship. It extends into the work they've chosen to build together. As highlighted by them, Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe are involved in Cleat Cute, a project centered on a queer love story in the world of professional soccer. It's the kind of story that hasn't historically been given much space in mainstream sports media, and their involvement reflects something they've consistently stood for: visibility, authenticity, and representation. Even as their relationship evolves, this project shows that their shared commitment to telling meaningful, community-centered stories remains intact, adding a layer of continuity to a moment that might otherwise feel like a complete ending. Over time, they became one of the most recognizable couples in sports. Not because they constantly put everything on display, but because their connection felt real. That authenticity made their engagement in 2020 feel meaningful, a relationship that existed confidently in the spotlight. Which is why this separation lands differently. It's not just about two people going their separate ways. It's about the end of something people believed in. But when you look closer, it becomes less about an ending and more about a transition. Both retired from their sports, and that shift changes everything. The structure, the purpose, the identity. All of it begins to evolve. And during that kind of change, relationships are tested. Not because something is wrong, but because people grow in different directions. Reports suggest that's exactly what happened here. A gradual evolution, not a sudden break. What made people start talking was Megan Rapinoe's Instagram post. Once the separation was confirmed, the meaning became clearer. For a lot of people, especially in our community, relationships aren't always linear. They change, they grow, and sometimes they move in different directions. If you like to reflect on that, I left a couple of LGBTQ-focused journals and books in the description that really explore those kinds of experiences. Moments like this often only make sense in hindsight. And before we go further, I'm curious what you think. Do you think this had been building for a long time? Or did retirement change everything for them? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective. Because what's striking here is what's missing. There's no conflict, no public tension, no drama, just two people recognizing a shift. And that kind of ending can be harder to process. Because there's no single moment to explain it. Some relationships don't end suddenly. They evolve until they no longer fit the same way. For fans, this carries emotional weight. Not just because of who they are, but because of what they represented. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not every relationship is defined by how long it lasts. Some are defined by what they mean while they exist, and how they evolve when life changes. And maybe that's why this moment resonates so strongly. Because it reflects something real. The idea that even strong connections can shift over time. Not out of failure, but out of growth. And when that happens, the ending doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, after everything has already begun to change. And when you go back to how their story actually began, it doesn't feel obvious. In 2016, both were part of a photo shoot around the Rio Olympics. They crossed paths backstage in a moment that felt more awkward than meaningful. Megan Rapinoe later recalled it in a 2021 interview with NBC. Sue Bird was there in her basketball uniform, hair down, just before a game. Trying to break the ice, Rapinoe made a light comment. "Oh hey, ready for your game?" The kind of thing that sounds casual but doesn't always land. Sue Bird later joked that she found it funny, but also a bit awkward. The kind of first moment you replay in your head afterward. Over time, it became something they both laughed about. Bird even called Rapinoe a total dork from that first meeting. At that point, there was no clear sign anything more would come from it. Just a brief, slightly clumsy introduction between two athletes. But sometimes, those imperfect beginnings are what make a story feel real. Their connection didn't start polished or cinematic. It developed gradually, in a natural and unforced way. By 2017, that familiarity had grown into something deeper. And that's when they started dating. That same year, Sue Bird spoke publicly about their relationship. In an interview with ESPNW, she said simply, "I'm gay. Megan's my girlfriend. These aren't secrets." There was no dramatic reveal, just honesty. For those close to her, it wasn't new information. But for the public, it marked a shift, adding another layer to how people saw her. Not just as an athlete, but as a person. Megan Rapinoe had already come out years earlier, in 2012, at a time when visibility in sports carried even more weight. In a 2020 interview, she spoke about how important that step was, not just for herself, but for what it represented. It was about being fully aligned with who she was, both on and off the field, and understanding the impact of that visibility, especially for people who rarely see themselves represented. When you look at all of that together, it adds depth to their story. The awkward beginning, the gradual connection, the openness. It shows that their relationship didn't start as a headline. It became one over time, shaped by shared experiences and mutual respect, and a willingness to be seen as they truly were. And maybe that's why their story resonated so deeply. Because it never felt staged or exaggerated, it felt human from the very beginning.